Well, now we're finally going to find out what the MAGA movement didn't want you to see about Jack Smith's testimony until we, the public, and the legal community put tremendous pressure on the House Judiciary Committee. We have just received the video, which has been dumped along with a massive 200-page transcript that we've finally gotten our hands on in the last hour or two, right here on New Year's Eve. This isn't just a standard document release. It is a tactical information dump meant to be buried during the holidays, but the sheer weight of the evidence is far too heavy to stay hidden. It is exactly what we thought it would be. A masterclass in prosecutorial integrity. Jack Smith didn't just give his testimony, he delivered a complete smackdown of Jim Jordan and other congresspeople who entered that room with a desperate political agenda. They wanted to prove that Jack Smith was political, that he had a personal vendetta, and that his sole mission was to take down Donald Trump. But have they forgotten who this man is and where he came from? Before being appointed as special counsel, Jack Smith was in The Hague, serving at the International Court on War Crimes. He wasn't even in America, and he is a registered independent, the very reason Merrick Garland chose him. He wasn't part of the D.C. political machine, which makes the MAGA narrative of a preconceived notion or a crime in search of a target completely fallacious. What we see in this transcript is the result of evidence leading to indictments, not once but twice, against Donald Trump. In his opening statement, which I've posted for our paid members to celebrate hitting #1 on Substack for U.S. politics, Smith laid it all out clearly. He followed the law and the facts, and he made it undeniably clear that he would have prosecuted Donald Trump regardless of party affiliation. This wasn't about the P word for politics, this was about the E word, evidence. He stood his ground in room 2237 of the Rayburn building, showing the world that while he has been declared a traitor by the most powerful person in the universe, he remains standing and delivering the truth. Let's look at the actual video of Jack Smith delivering his opening statement in room 2237 of the Rayburn building on December 17, 2025, which was just released today. For nearly 3 decades, Smith has been a career prosecutor, serving during both Republican and Democratic administrations. He sat there with his lawyer and made it very clear. He has been guided by legal principles in every single role he has held, including his appointment as special counsel in November of 2022. One of the biggest MAGA talking points is that this is a Biden-directed prosecution.
For nearly 3 decades, I've been a career prosecutor. I've served during both Republican and Democratic administrations, and I've been guided by those principles in every role I've held. I continued to honor those principles when I was appointed to serve as special counsel in November of 2022. The decision to bring charges against President Trump was mine, but the basis for those charges rests entirely with President Trump and his actions, as alleged in the indictments returned by grand juries in 2 different districts. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power. Our investigation also developed powerful evidence that showed that President Trump willfully retained highly classified documents after he left office in January of 2021, storing them at his social club, including in a ballroom and a bathroom. He then repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents.
But Smith shut that down immediately. He stated on the record that while the decision to bring charges was his alone, the basis for those charges rests entirely with Donald Trump and his own actions, as alleged by grand juries in his different districts. The evidence wasn't manufactured. It was developed through investigation into a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power. And then there's the Mar-a-Lago case. Smith's investigation developed powerful evidence showing that Trump willfully retained highly classified documents after leaving office in January 2021. We're talking about national security secrets stored at a social club, not in a secure vault, but in a ballroom and even a bathroom. The transcript reveals Smith's frustration with the obstruction of justice that followed, where Trump repeatedly tried to conceal his continued retention of those sensitive documents. Jim Jordan clearly came into this deposition with his own scripted agenda. He wanted to trap Smith into admitting a "get Trump" bias, but Smith took him down point by point. He clarified that there was no presumption of a crime going in, rather it was the evidence that dictated the outcome. Smith emphasized that the investigation only proceeded because the facts supported it, regardless of the political standing of the target. One of the most persistent attacks from Jim Jordan and the MAGA caucus has been the question of timing. They constantly ask, why now? Why wait until a few months before the campaign or during the election cycle to bring these indictments? In this newly released transcript, Jack Smith provides a clinical, legalistic answer that strips away the political noise. He explains that the timing was dictated solely by the strength of the evidence. Smith made it clear that the Department of Justice doesn't just rush into an indictment of a former president, who is also running for office again, without ensuring every I is dotted and every T is crossed. According to the Justice Manual and the Principles of Federal Prosecution, you must have probable cause to believe a crime was committed, you must have the specific elements of that crime, and you must believe you can sustain that conviction through the entire appeal process. This doesn't happen all at once, it happens along a time continuum. Smith refused to bring the case until the evidence met the highest possible standard of proof. The transcript also reveals that Smith wasn't operating in a vacuum. Throughout the process, he consulted with the Department of Justice leadership and the Solicitor General, the number 4 official in the DOJ.
You just made some pretty definitive statements about, your belief that President Trump was guilty of these charges. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe we had proof beyond a reasonable doubt in both cases.
And doesn't the Justice Manual prohibit prosecutors from asserting that a defendant is guilty of something before a jury makes a determination?
When a case is pending, yes.
This confirms that the investigation was a methodical, institutional effort, not a rogue operation as the MAGA narrative suggests. There is a particularly powerful moment in the video deposition where Jim Jordan tries to corner Smith on his personal beliefs regarding the case. Jordan asks if Smith made definitive statements about Trump's guilt. Without blinking, Smith answers, "Yes. I believe we had proof beyond a reasonable doubt in both cases." Jordan then tries a gotcha move, asking if the Justice Manual prohibits prosecutors from asserting a defendant's guilt before a jury makes a determination. Smith calmly agrees that it does while a case is pending, but his confidence in the evidence remained unshaken throughout the 9-hour interrogation. He wasn't giving a political opinion. He was stating a prosecutorial conclusion based on the facts in the indictments. Now let's talk about what Jim Jordan really tried to make this deposition about, because it's essentially the only gotcha tactic he had left. He spent a massive amount of time obsessed with the issue of toll records. The MAGA narrative has been trying to frame this as an illegal spying operation on Congress, but Jack Smith took that narrative and absolutely dismantled it. Smith clarified for the record that what they were doing was not a wiretap, and it wasn't a pen register. For those who don't know the legal distinction, Smith laid it out perfectly. A wiretap is an actual electronic or mechanical device where you are listening in on a live phone conversation. A pen register allows you to take down the details of what is being said. Jack Smith has been involved in those types of high-level surveillance cases before, and he made it clear that is not what happened here. None of the actual content of any conversation was ever obtained through these search warrants. So what were they actually looking at? Smith used an analogy that every American can understand: your Verizon bill. When you open your phone bill, it doesn't tell you that you called your grandmother to wish her a happy birthday. It doesn't give you the words or the sentiment. It simply shows the phone number called, the date, and the duration of the call, like 3.8 minutes. That is exactly what these toll records are: historical telephone routing information. These records were lawfully subpoenaed and sought for a very defined period, January 5th to January 7th. The reason was simple. The investigation developed evidence that Donald Trump was coordinating with members of Congress to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. They weren't doing their legislative duties. They were allegedly trying to buy time to help Trump cling to power. Smith's response to Jordan's outrage was legendary. "I did not choose those members. President Trump did." Jim Jordan was clearly incensed that this was done without tipping off the members of Congress involved. He was looking for a smoking gun to prove Smith was overreaching, but instead, he found a prosecutor who followed the law, got search warrants approved by a judge, and issued them through a grand jury. There was no policy requiring Smith to notify Congress, and Smith wasn't about to compromise a criminal investigation to satisfy Jim Jordan's sense of entitlement. This section of the transcript proves that the spying allegation was just another failed MAGA talking point. Beyond the legal maneuvers and the fight over records, this transcript reveals a deeply personal side of Jack Smith's mission. He spoke with visible emotion about being saddened and angered by the fact that the career officials who worked alongside him,
Recent narratives about my team's work are false and misleading, including stories about our collection of toll records. Toll records were sought for historical telephone routing information, collected after calls had taken place, identifying the incoming and outgoing call numbers, the time of the calls and their duration. Toll records do not include the content of calls. Those records were lawfully subpoenaed and were relevant to complete a comprehensive investigation. January 6th was an attack on the structure of our democracy in which over 140 heroic law enforcement officers were assaulted. Over 160 individuals later pled guilty to assaulting police that day. Exploiting that violence, President Trump and his associates tried to call members of Congress in furtherance of their criminal scheme, urging them to further delay certification of the 2020 election. I did not choose those members. President Trump did. I hope that my testimony today serves to correct these mischaracterizations about my work, and to that end, I welcome your questions.
People from the FBI and the Department of Justice have been systematically vilified. These are career professionals just doing their jobs, yet they have faced threats of being fired, prosecuted, and publicly shamed for simply following the evidence. Smith himself has been at the center of this storm. He noted that from the most powerful pulpit in the world, the presidency of the United States, he has been declared a traitor who should be jailed. Yet, despite these unprecedented personal attacks, Smith stands firm in this deposition, delivering a clinical defense of the rule of law. He isn't there to trade insults. He is there to remind the committee and the American people about the brutal reality of what happened on January 6th. In one of the most sobering sections of his testimony, Smith stripped away the peaceful protest revisionism that has become so common in MAGA circles. He reminded the room that January 6th was a violent attack on the very structure of our democracy. He cited the grim statistics. Over 140 heroic law enforcement officers were assaulted that day. Furthermore, over 160 individuals have since pleaded guilty specifically to assaulting police during the riot. The most explosive part of this testimony is how Smith connects that violence to Donald Trump's actions. Smith alleges that while the violence was unfolding, President Trump and his associates didn't try to stop it. Instead, they exploited it. They used the chaos as leverage to call members of Congress, urging them to further delay the certification of the 2020 election in furtherance of their criminal scheme. Smith's point was clear and devastating. He didn't target these members of Congress out of thin air. They were part of the call logs because Donald Trump chose to reach out to them during a national crisis to cling to power. This wasn't just a failure of leadership. It was, as alleged in the indictments, a criminal exploitation of an attack on the Capitol. If this 9-hour deposition was a boxing match, it was a total knockout by Jack Smith against an overmatched and overwhelmed Jim Jordan. It is quite something to watch. On one side, you have Jim Jordan, who graduated from law school, but, as we know, apparently never took or passed the bar exam. On the other side, you have Jack Smith, who is arguably one of the finest lawyers in American history. The transcript makes the disparity in their legal acumen painfully obvious. Jordan tried to set traps, but he was essentially bringing a knife to a gunfight against a prosecutor who has spent decades in the most high-stakes legal arenas in the world. What Jack Smith has accomplished here is historically unprecedented. The fact that he was able to secure 2 separate indictments from 2 different grand juries against a former president of the United States, specifically regarding his activities at the end of his presidency while he was running for office, is a legal feat beyond measure. To use a circus analogy, this wasn't just a high-wire act without a net. This was like diving from a high wire into a single shot glass of water and making it perfectly. It's what I call threading an elephant through the eye of a needle. The 250-page transcript, which we've made available for our community, is a testament to this precision. While there are some redactions to protect specific individuals, The vast majority of it is wide open for the public to see. It's not just pages of blacked-out text. It's a clear, readable record of a prosecutor defending his work and the integrity of the Department of Justice. It is absolutely vital for history that Jack Smith's actual words, coming directly out of his mouth in this video deposition, be exposed to the American people. For too long, the narrative has been controlled by those who want to discredit the investigation, but this release changes everything. Jack Smith is the only special counsel in recent history who didn't initially have the opportunity to tell the American people the results of his investigation directly. Think about it. Robert Hur got to go before the public. Robert Mueller got to go. John Durham got to go. And even the Watergate prosecutors had their moment. This national debate is necessary to expose exactly who Donald Trump is and what the evidence shows, and this deposition is the first step in that long-overdue public conversation. If you ask me to summarize the core takeaway from this massive Jack Smith recording and the 240-page transcript, it's quite clear. It all comes down to a definitive theory of criminal liability that Smith has meticulously constructed. Under oath, unlike Donald Trump, Smith lays out a narrative that is backed by hard evidence, not just political rhetoric. The takeaway is this. Donald Trump knowingly made false statements. He targeted a lawful government function, the certification of an election, and he mobilized his supporters based on those deliberate falsehoods. Smith's testimony makes it clear that this wasn't just a series of unfortunate events or a spontaneous protest. It was a directed effort. The evidence shows that Trump directed his followers to the Capitol, he refused to stop the violence once it began, and he continued to pressure Congress to delay the certification even as the building was under siege. In his opening statement, Smith reiterated that they had not only probable cause, which is the legal standard required to bring an indictment, but proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump committed these crimes to interfere with the election. What is particularly fascinating in this transcript is how Smith addresses the legal hurdles, including the United States Supreme Court's ruling on the immunity decision. Smith is operating with the full knowledge of those constitutional boundaries, and yet he remains confident that the evidence gathered survives that scrutiny. Whether it's the D.C. election interference case in front of Judge Chutkan or the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case, the indictment hurdle has been cleared because the evidence was credible and overwhelming. Smith emphasizes that they were ready to go to trial because the facts were ready. He isn't just speculating, he is standing behind a body of work that has survived the intense pressure of a grand jury and the scrutiny of the highest courts. This isn't just about one man's opinion, it's about a systematic attempt to hold a former president accountable for actions that, as Smith alleges, struck at the very heart of the American democratic process. The transcript serves as a reminder that while the political noise is loud, the legal record being built by Jack Smith is quiet, steady, and increasingly devastating. We will continue to follow every development of this case as it unfolds, because the exposure of these actual words and videos is vital to our national history.